So thank you everyone for joining. Hope you're all well. Welcome to today's session, a practical case of how to apply AI in a container terminal. We know that terminals generate revenue by moving containers, but 30% of those moves are unproductive, which means that generates additional costs and inefficiencies. Container terminals face around 2 million euros in additional costs for 200,000 TEU yard, which comes up with increasing total distance travel of equipment, extra use of resources, and so on. In this webinar, we will look at a practical case to deeply understand how much cost those inefficiencies can generate and how they can be fixed by reducing unproductive moves. We will have a look at the practical case of cost-value calculation that generates a 200,000 TEU terminal for non-productive moves, and how an AI application can reduce these costs and the impact they have on a container terminal. Today, we will see how eYARD as a cloud-based solution improves productivity and cuts costs, reducing the number of unproductive moves by introducing AI into the everyday operations of the terminals. We're joined today by our experts, Pablo and Mike. Hello, both.
Hello, Marta. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Marta. Good afternoon.
Hi, Mike. Pablo is CEO and co-founder at eYARD. Pablo is an entrepreneur with vast experience in creating high added value technology solutions and apply them to complex processes in different sectors. Mike is an advisory board member at eYARD. Mike has over 30 years of experience in port and inland terminals. He started his career in the port of Rotterdam at ECT, where he was a member of the design team for the world's first automated container handling facility. He also worked for GRUP-TCV in Barcelona, which was later bought by APM Terminals. So the objectives of today's sessions, the things that Pablo and Mike will cover and will show us in their practical case will be how to make estimates of the shifters and related costs to your terminal, how much you could save by applying artificial intelligence to this issue, the necessary steps to achieve this goal, and the exact application and integration with your TOS. Through the course of the webinar, we will be launching some surveys to get everyone involved. It would be great to get your thoughts, and likewise, if at any point of the webinar you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the Q&A or to the chat box of the Zoom interface. So without further ado, Pablo, I think it would be great if you could please remind us, what is eYARD?
Of course, Marta. So let me, before I describe briefly what eYARD is, let me give you a little bit of background, to people understand why we came with this solution and how eYARD was launched and created. eYARD was launched a couple of years ago from the experience of the co-founders have on both container terminal operations, but also, as you mentioned before, on applying high added value technology solutions to complex problem solving in different kind of businesses, right? So one of the things that we encountered a few years ago was that there was certain complaining from container terminal operators about how the current software was optimizing the terminal. So we start researching about this specific topic, and we, after discussing with different container terminals in different countries, we came to three main conclusions or three main takeaways. First was that 75% of the software being currently used on terminal operations is legacy software. So it's basically software where it was firstly implemented in the 1990s or early 2000s. So doesn't necessarily include the newest technology. Second main takeaway that we found was that these terminal operating systems were rule-based, okay? And don't get me wrong here, I don't necessarily say that rules are bad, but what we found out is that rules not necessarily always add value to the terminal operations. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We empirically demonstrated that many of these rules actually include or add cost to the terminal and include or add inefficiencies on the day-to-day operations. And the third main takeaway that we took from this research was that 100% of TOSes were basically focused on execution and administration. So basically, every time there was a container getting in or getting out, it was basically recording that data and executing that particular operation, right? So when we have that all in mind, and with our experience with technology, we basically ask ourselves, what if we could predict container movements in a container terminal space? What if we could plan ahead and simulate different scenarios? Would that help container terminal operators make better plans, make better use of the resources, even cut costs? So we start looking at all the technology that is available in the market right now. And what we quickly came to the conclusion that the best technology in order to solve this problem was reinforcement learning. I don't want to get too technical into this, but basically what makes reinforcement learning the perfect fit, reinforcement learning is a subset of artificial intelligence, is the most resilient technology that exists. So basically what it means is that it's the most easy to adapt to the ever-changing environment on container terminals. So we know that a container terminal is really unpredictable. It has a lot of changes, terminal layout, new vessel coming with a additional number of containers, reefer, whatever. So there are a lot of changes. So what reinforcement learning does is it learns by itself every time there is a new change in the terminal, and learns from those changes to optimize the space. So after we identify the problem and we identify the solution, we look, okay, where we can apply this technology in container terminal operations. And we had different user cases. We have yard planning, in which we can optimize movements and stacking strategies to reduce unproductive moves, as you mentioned before. We have berth planning to forecast vessel arrival and optimize berth opportunities. We have yard simulation to help plan better and make better use of the assets. So at the end, there are different and multiple user cases in which this can be applied. We decided to start focusing first on the unproductive moves problem, right, in the yard planning model. So what we created is a cloud-based software that connects to any TOS, adding, if you allow me, a layer of intelligence to automate processes and workflow, and calculates hundreds and thousands of stacking strategies for every single container moves. Then it allocates to every one of those moves a number of KPIs. Those are more relevant for that particular operator, and then takes the optimal position and sends it back to the TOS. The beautiful thing about technology nowadays is that it can do all this that I just described in less than 50 milliseconds, right? So it's a really nice way, an efficient way to look at all the data mining and then come up with really good simulations and the best optimal scenario.
That's great, Pablo. Thank you very much. And so we're going to launch the first survey, the first poll, and ask our attendees today if they actually believe that data and AI will transform the container terminal industry in the coming years. You should see it popping onto your screens right now. You have 3 options: yes, no, or will impact, but not too much. Will be great to get your responses on it. So thank you everyone for participating too. Lovely, thank you. So Pablo, you mentioned that yard planning and unproductive moves, but what impact do those problems have on container terminals? It does look, by the way, like our attendees think that it will revolutionize the terminal industry.
Yeah, it's not a surprise that most of the attendees think this way. At the end, actually, AI is actually being used in many other sectors around the world. To give you an idea, it is expected by year 2030 that 90% of air traffic control will be done by machines. But it's also being used to predict earthquake and save millions of lives. So there is no, in our opinion, at least in a humble opinion, we believe that this is going to transform really the industry in the years to come. And the impact, as you were asking, is huge. The impact that unproductive moves have on container terminals is huge. Based on our experience with other container terminals in different countries, we estimated that there are around 17 billion euros on additional costs being generated by container terminals around the world. So it's a large impact. To put you a little bit more in context, we estimate that for a 200,000 TEU terminal with a relatively high occupation ratio of around 70 to 80%, around 1.5 to 2 million euros are generated additionally on an annual basis to these terminal operations. So the impact is large, but it also has a domino effect because it's not only the cost associated to it, but a lot of KPIs that are behind it track turnaround, vessel waiting time, fuel consumption, CO2 emissions. There are a number of KPIs that are really impacted directly because of the eYARD planning optimization tool. One of the nice things that we identified while doing the research was that independently of the size of the terminal, so really doesn't matter whether it's a 2 million or 3 million TEU, or it's a 100,000 TEU terminal, and independently of the level of automation, again, doesn't really matter if it is fully automated or 100% manual, there is a constant, relatively high number of unproductive moves in the terminal. In general, or in average, around 30%, as you were mentioning at the beginning of the call, of the moves that happen in a terminal are non-productive. The impact that this has in terminal operations and cost and P&L and economics and competitiveness of the terminal itself is quite large. So the first thing that we do when we partner up with an operator is basically we help them identify the size of the problem. Because sometimes because of the software currently being used, sometimes because of the pilot, the rich stacker RTG doesn't fully record every single movement. It is not clear how big the problem is, no? And sometimes comes as a surprise. So I don't want to get too much into detail on this because Mike will actually look at the tool that we use in order to help on doing that. But one of the things that maybe it's interesting for you to know is that once we have identified the size of the problem and we run our algorithms with that specific data sets and identify those KPIs, what we do is we share all the findings in our dashboard. Let me share with you for a moment our dashboard. I hope you see the dashboard. Marta, can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So basically, what you can expect from after doing a proof of concept or pilot with us is, in which we have identified KPIs, is we will show you the results in with the specific metrics that we have estimated or identified at the beginning. Here is an example of a terminal of around 100,000 TEU terminal, in which the red line you see the number of unproductive moves that were generated by TOS, and in the blue line you actually see the number of the unproductive moves generated by eYARD planning AI model, right? So first impression is that we cannot expect to reduce 100% the unproductive moves, whether you call them housekeeping or reshufflings or whatever. It is not expected. But just by reducing 10, 15, 20%, the impact that it has in different metrics is quite relevant, okay? There are, of course, depending on the terminal, we can look at different KPIs, but it has an impact on not only on absolute terms of the moves and in relative terms, but also in terms of the cost reduction and the total travel distance, okay? Second thing that we want to show, because these are just the results, the difference from previously to what we proposed, is where are those numbers actually coming from, right? So on the bottom of the page, you see the 10 top days that had the largest impact in terms of reduction of those unproductive moves. And we can go actually one by one to every single day in the whole database, not only those 10 that I show, but every single day that we have in the database. So actually, by day, we can look at every KPI again that identified what was the impact on that specific date and what were all the movements that happens by the time the operation happens, container license, the type of movements, a number of things, and then actually compare where the difference comes from. Not only tell you that there is a difference, but why the difference exists. In this case, for instance, there were 4 shiftings in order to get to the container with the TOS used, and non-movements, non-shiftings with the solution that we are suggesting. We also show in the top picture, in the top image, where the container was located with the current TOS and where our suggestion was made in order to explain why there were no shiftings in that particular operation, right? This is, of course, for a specific terminal on Rickies, but it also can be adapted, and it's also adapted for RTGs or other sorts of resources. So in general terms, what we want to show is that after doing a proof of concept or a pilot, we can actually see what is the added value, what is the impact that this really brings to the terminal operations on a day-to-day basis, but also on the long term.
Thank you, Pablo. It does seem that some terminals could have difficulties identifying that problem. So Mike, could you give us an example based on eYARD's experience working with terminals around the world of the size of the problem?
Yes, Marta, that's indeed the case, as you mentioned. And we developed a sort of a tool, and I hope that everyone can see it by now. If you can confirm that, Marta, then it would be helpful.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. And so what we set up is a small model where we have a mathematical formula to calculate the number of shifters. But for that, we need some input, obviously. So what you see here is a schematic of a container terminal, and all 4 different modalities are present. So it could be the marine side, the vessels, barges for river transport, trains for rail transport, and trucks for the land transport by road. And on top of that, we also incorporated an area where you can show if you have a lot of customs inspection and maintenance and repair, because all these activities around the yard will place containers in a yard or get a container out of the yard. And especially when it is about getting a container out of the yard is where your shifters can take place. Imagine you need the bottom container, you have 3 on top, so you have to remove those 3 first. So that's 3 shifters, and then you can take out the 4th one, which is the one you needed. So what we did in this small model, and this is for a reach stacker terminal with only seaside and road transport modalities, we filled in a little bit of details. So on the incoming traffic for the vessel, how many containers full, how many containers empty. And well, we love details sometimes. We split it between 20 and 40 feet containers as well. But if these details are not available, you can put in here immediately the amount of moves as well. So this is for the incoming from the vessel. This, after a while, they will leave the terminal and the other way around as well. And if you sum it all up, you have here a total of number of yard in and out moves. And on top of that, you have to add your shifters. Because as you said, and Pablo also, a lot of terminals don't know how many shifters they have. So for this, we added a mathematical formula, which is the result of many simulations we did. And we need a few parameters for that. Well, as I said, it's a reach stacker terminal. Here is the results from what I have on the top and the bottom. And then what I need additional is what is the average stacking height? Because the higher the average stacking height is, the higher the amount of shifters will be. And also what you need is, in case of reach stackers, how many containers do you have in a block which you can approach from the front? So if you have 3, then it's, you have 1, 2, 3. That's different than when you have, for example, a straddle carrier operation where you always take them from the top. So that is slightly different. So with these 2 parameters and the calculation of the amount of empties and loaded export, which in general do not generate a lot of shifters, we can determine with the formula that this terminal, which is around 150, 145 TEUs on the key side, which generates 220,000 moves, that has most likely in the order of 115,000 shifters, which is about 50%. Or it's about 30% if you see it as the total amount of moves done by all the equipment. So if you have this basis, and let's just assume, for example, that I have hardly, I go, instead of 3, I go to 4. So I add an extra row in my blocks. You see that your amount of yard moves will up because of the amount of shifters. And if my stacking height goes to 3 high, you will see that almost 47% of all your moves are shifters. And that's quite an amount of shifters. Well, if you have this basis, then we can go a little bit lower in our sheet and we can see, okay, now we have the number of shifters. Assume that the cost for each of these shifters, the variable cost by the equipment in the yard, is 10 euros per move, then it's 1.9 million euros you spend each year on shifters. And that's about 47%. if it is 15 euros, the percentage will not change, but your cost will go up to almost 3 million. So that's quite an amount of money. And then if you can save, for example, 30% of the shifters, you can reduce it. You have a cost saving of 860,000 euros a year, which is, I think, worthwhile to consider a tool like eYARD then, or something else to work on that, to reduce your shifters. I don't think that is very complicated to understand. Well, we did this for the reach Dekker. We also have one for RTG. But I have a small technical problem here. I'm sorry about that, because I have a button from Zoom on my spreadsheet and I don't know how to get rid of that.
Would it help if you stop sharing and try to...
No, here I am. I just deleted it. Nothing serious happened. I'm still online, I guess.
Yes, you are.
And also sometimes we have to keep the public awake as well by making some practical joke in between. So here we have a situation for an RTG terminal on which, other than the sea and the land side, I also added train and barge traffic now. But as I said, the average block width is now just 1, because you can approach the containers from the top. So it's now the average stacking height, which will be a determining factor for the calculation of this amount of shifters. So this terminal is about 500,000 TEUs on the seaside, in total about 1 million if you take all the yard movements. There's no inspection and so on in this case. I put it at 3.7, well then I generate about 120,000 shifters. So it's only 70% of the total containers handled by the yard equipment. If I go lower, obviously that will go down. If I go up to 4, then I will go to, I think, about 20%. And the same for the costs. You can do the same math with those numbers. Well, this is a way of determining the number of shifters for a terminal. If the terminal, its TOS, does not register the amount of shifters, which in many cases seems to be the case, so this can help. So what we ask then people is to fill in a template where the light blues are the data you have to fill in. Give us some other specifics, send it to us, and then we will come back with an answer about what are the possibilities for your savings, for example, if you need help. Another way of doing it is go to our website, and then there is a form you can fill in, not with this many details, but just a little few. And then also we can make some kind of an estimate for that.
That's great. Thank you, Mike. And so we would like to involve the audience again and ask, do you know exactly how much money your terminal spends on unproductive moves? You should see the poll popping onto your screens now. Do you know exactly how much money your terminal spends on unproductive moves? So yes, no, I have an idea, but not exactly. We should be able to see the answers soon. Just a couple more seconds. Thank you everyone for participating of this too. Can we, oh, there we go. I think you should see the results soon. So most of the attendees have an idea, but not exactly. So that's very interesting. A very interesting tool, Mike, as well. Thank you for sharing again. Before we finish the session, as we said, we would like to go over the how we can fix the problems with AI technology. Mike, so which are the necessary steps to get there?
Well, Marta, for the steps, I think it's good to go to our website where we have quite a lot of information on eYARD, and one of the tabs here is, and I have to share that with you before I start talking, I guess. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. There we go. You can see.
So here we go. So this is the website, eYARD.io. And here we have one of the tabs which is called delivery model. And if you go to that, we explain.
Mike, there we go. It looked like it was frozen for a minute, but
yeah.
We can see it now. It's just loading.
And here we go immediately down.
Thank you.
So this is a graphic of how it works, how our delivery model works. So when we have made this estimate before, and the client is interested to go ahead, and we had a number of discussions on how to proceed. Well, we define what we call a pilot, and in that pilot, one of the first steps is to get a data set of your terminal. For that, you have to give us access to your data, or you send us a database or a large, or whatever, sheets with all the information of the container moves, which were done in the yard during a specific period. For example, last 2 years. The longer the period, the better it is. And that our data analyst starts first cleaning up to see if it's all clear. There might be some conversations with operational department, with IT departments from your terminal. And just in order to get a good, clean, prepared data set, which will then be feed in the algorithm, to say it that way. That's the next step. So the algorithm will be trained with that data. Also, during the training process, certain situations might pop up, which we didn't expect, or we need a clarification. So for that, there will be ongoing communication with operational people and the IT people. And also then at the end, after a few weeks, well, the algorithm has been trained, and then we do 2 runs. One with the existing data, how did the terminal work in the past without applying eYARD? Then I measure a number of KPIs. For example, how many moves were made, how many shifters did I do, what was the total travel distance, etc. And then I run again the past, but now with the eYARD algorithm working and putting the containers at the positions where it thinks it's best. And I measure again the same KPIs. So then I start comparing, and if those KPIs are satisfactory to both parties, we can start with the integration. And the integration with your TOS is to ensure that the communication between the TOS and eYARD works well. This is done via an API REST protocol, so that's very technical, but it comes roughly near up. Okay, the TOS needs a position for a container. It sends a message to eYARD via this API call. eYARD makes thousands of calculations of what might be the best position for this container. That will be then in the end is one or few, and he picks one, will be sent back to the TOS, and the TOS will send it to the screen of the equipment operator or the gate operator to give the instructions to the truck driver where to go. This is how the integration works. Most TOSs, they are capable of integrating via API, so that should not be a problem. And then we have, well, as Pablo showed before, the dashboard. If your TOS, doesn't have a good tool to show what's going on in your yard, eYARD can provide this as well, or at least we can add some extra KPIs like the number of shifters which are counted, but also the number of times you do not accept a position which is suggested by eYARD. And this is, I think, also important to mention. Well, this integration could be done in 1 to 2 months. So the total lead time is, say, between 3 to maybe 6 months. And it all depends on the quality of the data, how large a facility is, and how the communication goes with the different parties who are involved in this process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you both, Pablo and Mike, for the demos. We hope that everyone in the webinar, found value in the answers provided by them. We can see some questions coming through, so thank you very much for participating. We're going to try to answer as many as we can, but let's say, Pablo, Mike, can eYARD use the same technology for other user cases in container terminals?
Mike, do you want, I take this one if you want. Yes, yes, indeed. So actually, we've been asked to actually apply the same technology because of the resilience capability that reinforcement learning has to apply on different user cases. We during this call we talked about yard planning and how to optimize container movement and stacking strategies through the reduction of unproductive moves. But also, of course, you have berth planning, you have yard simulations to actually answer to the questions of what if, no? What if I have a larger vessels bringing 200 additional reefer containers into the yard? What if I change the terminal layout to this or this other? What if I change from an reach stacker to an RTG operations? So there are different user cases and applications in which this technology can be applied. Yes.
Thank you, Pablo. Maybe Mike, we have another one for you here. If let's say the set stack height is 1, what is the percentage shifter?
Well, there's still a percentage of shifters. It sounds maybe weird because if you think it's 1, you never have to shift. But normally when the yard is not, it's an average of 1. So there are slots which are empty. There are some slots which have 2 or maybe 3. So the average is 1, and well, actually, I went to see in the model what was going on. We have, for example, the situation with this reach stacker operation where I had an average stacking height of 3.5. I saw that I had about 45% of shifters of the total yard moves. If I go to 1, then it will reduce to about 20%, which is still a significant amount, I would say.
Mm.
And it's also true, Mike, that shifter is one KPI, but you also have to take into account the total travel distance, right? I mean, you have all the containers spread through the old yard occupancy. You most likely are increasing the track or the vessel turnaround. So there has to be also other things they take into account. It doesn't not necessarily put it only in one floor.
No, that's correct, and that is what happened actually. When you have a lower occupancy, most likely you will have them more densely together, and that is why, although the average for your whole yard is 1, there is some areas where it's maybe 2 or 3 high. So, and then of course in a reach stacker operation where you can access, say, 3 containers, you need always the last one. For example, you always have 2 shifters, although they are at 1 high.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both. We have another question. How does eYARD deal with sensitive data?
Shall I tackle that, Pablo? Thank you. Well, sensitive data, of course, is there. For example, customer codes, shipping lines or ports, or other details on containers which a terminal would like to keep hidden. For the algorithm, it's important to know what kind of value is there. So there's the possibility, for example, to anonymize your, to make it anonymous, those fields, and say customer 1, customer 2, customer 3, instead of Maersk, CMA, CGM, MSC, ZIM, or whoever. And the same for ports. You can say port 1, port 2, port 3, or you can say, well, I don't know, inland 1, inland 2, inland 3 as destination. If you don't want to show that detail to us, and of course, and I think that's almost logical. We sign an NDA at the beginning of each process, so we have a non-disclosure agreement which binds both parties to keep the data they are exchanging secret.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mike. Pablo, I think the next one will be for you. So which are the most important problems in integrating eYARD with other TOS?
Okay, first thing is that we don't really integrate, but we communicate. We connect with the TOS, right? So it's via API call, as Mike properly pointed out a few minutes ago. So it's by API that we connect with them and send the suggestions. it really the problems on the whole process comes really at the beginning, right? With the quality of the data sets, with what data is actually being recorded, what is the quality of the data. We find a lot of things missing in that data. That needs a little bit of working from our side first, and then make the suggestions to the terminal operator or the TOS. Once that is done, and we run it through our algorithms and show the results, the connection, of course, as might have all different types of problems. That's why we scale it or step it, make it in different steps. Why we go first to one gate, we make different tests with that gate. Then once we are sure that the system is working properly and the connection is working properly, we're doing it at points in time where the terminal is not discharging on a vessel, so we are not interrupting anything. We move to the second gate if there is a second or a third, and then we move to the equipment side of it. So we do it step by step to disrupt as least as possible the operations of the terminal. But in terms of typically the connection and the API system is really easy. It might think that an endpoint is not working well and we need to fine tune it. Might be that the suggestions are not working properly, or the TOS is not receiving the locations properly, or they are empty. So those kinds of things that's why we have to test a few days for testing before we go into production.
Thank you, Pablo. Mike, are there differences in the number of unproductive shifting between gateway terminals and transshipment terminals?
Yes, Marta, there are. As you can imagine, as I said, the empty containers and loaded export containers, or loaded containers that leave the yard, especially through seaside or barge or rail, that's normally planned. So that is where you can avoid shifters. But especially the amount of loaded import containers, which are taken away by trucks, that is where the majority of the shifters will occur. So if you have a gateway terminal, most likely you have a lot of loaded import containers. So here you have a significant amount of shifters probability. If it is a transshipment facility, you can plan much better the containers between the arrival from, say, earlier in the week till the departure later that week, how containers are loaded on that vessel, and that will reduce the amount of shifters. Say, maybe probability that shifters is about a tenth of what would happen with loaded import containers. So yes, it's conservative.
Thank you. And is there a difference between unproductive shifting for different type of yard equipment? So, for example, RS versus straddle carrier versus RTG?
Yes, also. That is why I showed differently RTGs and reach stackers, because especially reach stackers or empty container handlers, maybe not to the extent because they handle empties, but the reach stacker specifically because you approach from the frontal and 1, 2, 3 this direction, while RTG, RS, ASC, all kind of equipment which approach from the top, so you have only one block width. The height is the determining factor, but with the reach stackers, you have to add the dimension of the block width, and the wider the blocks, the higher the amount of shifters will be.
Thank you, Mike. I think we've got time for one last question. Maybe Pablo, you can let us know is simulation used to check and tune the algorithms?
Yes, constantly. So the first thing that we do, of course, when we receive the first data set, is after we have cleaned it and prepared all the data sets, we run it through algorithm. We train our algorithms and simulation on algorithms with that data sets. But terminal is it's a moving animal. It's constantly changing. New things are happening, and the system learns with these changes and by constantly applying and learning from all these differences that are happening from difference on the data sets and the changes in the container operations. So the answer would be yes, in different degrees, of course, and we need to explain a bit more in detail. Maybe it's not a topic for this call, but the quick answer would be yes, that's the case.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Pablo and Mike, for sharing such valuable and insightful information. And thank you also to everyone that asked some questions on the Q&A box. Thank you also to all attendees for joining us this afternoon. We hope your questions on the matter have been answered and look forward to reconnecting with you in the future. Like Mike said during the integration demo, please feel free to let us know via the chat box if you're interested in receiving this formula ahead of us creating a precise free estimation of how you could optimize your terminal as well. If there's anything else we can help with, you can always contact us. So have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.